Good evening. From the Gail Lemron Auditorium and the Captain Willie Miller Building on the campus of Embry-Riddle in Daytona Beach, welcome to the President's Speaker Series. On behalf of President John Johnson, I'm the moderator, Marc Bernier, for tonight's event. Tonight, air travel, safety, and efficiency. We'll talk about something that is known to people in the industry, but is being learned by many more Americans, and we hope through this program tonight what NextGen is all about. The topic of our program tonight is From NextGen to NowGen, an evolution, not a revolution. We have a panel of experts that we're going to bring forth, plus comments tonight from students and the general public, questions and answers. We have a lot to cover in a very little amount of time, so I'm going to go right to it and introduce for our radio audience, left to right on your radio dial, Jorge Ferrand, who is the Director of Advanced Programs, and he is an assistant at the NextGen program, and I have to get this right, at the Florida NextGen Testbed. They're very particular about titles. To his right is Clyde Rinkinen. He is an Associate Professor of Traffic Management. Then there's Craig Sid McGuirk. He's known to his friends as Sid, Associate Professor of Applied Sciences. And rounding out our panel tonight is Marty Lauth. We're going to take you through to explain what NextGen is. I'm going to ask them, and we'll have interweaving conversation on these issues. We have some air traffic control experience. We also have some scientific research. We begin with Jorge, who will explain exactly what NextGen is. This is something that has evolved. It's not something that just started recently. Jorge, why don't you take us through what exactly NextGen is?
Well, I'll try. It's a very complicated program, but first let me say, on behalf of Jim Kroll, our industry partners, the FAA customers, and my colleagues at Embry-Riddle, we want to thank you and Dr. Johnson for picking NextGen as the inaugural topic for 2014. So I rehearsed a little bit on how I would go about explaining NextGen to people. And for those of you that know, I've got a bride of 30 years who's from Boston, and she's got that accent going for her, right? So I told her, I said, and you'd be proud of me, I used my best Columbia School of Broadcasting voice, right? I said, NextGen is a transformational program that'll move air traffic control from radar-based systems to satellite-based systems. And her eyes glossed over, and she says, that sounds wicked boring. So she's right. It did sound wicked boring. She says, why don't you just tell them that it impacts absolutely everyone in this room that flies? So if you've ever flown on an airplane or used the national airspace, this program has impacted you. So we did a little more research on how to properly explain NextGen, and I came upon the former deputy administrator for the NextGen program. Her name is Vicki Cox, a brilliant woman. And she said, you have to think of NextGen as the interstate highway system. And I thought, well, that makes sense, the interstate highway system, we're all using it. And this is my editorial, it's a little bit more complicated than that, in that the interstate highway system, although it started in 1956, really just works at a ground level. We're working at, well, we've got the air traffic control folks here. I mean, we're working at tens of thousands of feet, so you can see multiple levels of interstate highways forming from the ground up. The next thing that becomes apparent in the complexity is that it's pretty hard to break these airplanes when they're mid-travel, right? And given traffic congestion or distances or timing or so forth, they're going to have to on-ramp or off-ramp from one particular interstate highway, if you call it in the sky, to another one, right? So that complicates things a little bit more. Further complicating things is the fact that you don't have navigation signs, and lack of navigation signs then prompts you to additional systems, more complicated systems, and how you go about directing those systems on and off those off-ramps. And then as if that wasn't enough, you have something called weather. And weather is, as these folks will tell you, more than I could, complicated at multiple levels. So depending on where you're at in that interstate, depending on which level you're at and what distances you have between other airplanes, you can see you've got yourself one juicy problem. And that's why we're excited about this. That's why we're so turned on about solving this complicated problem, and we're ready to sink our teeth into it. So what we're doing is we're modernizing the national airspace. We're putting in systems that allow us to safely, number one, reliably increase the capacity that we have currently in the national airspace. And we're doing a tremendous amount of work of that here at the Florida Test Bed with my colleagues who have shown up and are representing us, so thank you for doing that. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Florida Test Bed in just a minute. But one of the things that comes to mind when I think of the interstate highway system or NextGen is, how much is this puppy going to cost? I mean, this is going to be an expensive program. And I'm reminded of a Dilbert cartoon. And this Dilbert cartoon has the lead finance guy going to the CEO and saying, you know, what happens if we train our staff and they leave? And the CEO looks at the guy and says, what happens if we don't train our staff and they stay? Personally, I want my national airspace, when my family flies, when I fly, I want it as modern as possible. I don't want that, you know, low-rate scalpel being used on me. I don't want, et cetera, et cetera. You get the point. So the cost of implementing and maintaining NextGen is expected to cost the FAA and aircraft operators $38 billion through 2030, while generating $106 billion in total benefits throughout that same period. So think about that for a second, and this is with a respectful bow to Dean Williams and his folks at the College of Business, who wanted to make sure I said the term net present value. I'm not sure what that means anymore. I know I took it once in economics, but...
There are a lot of taxpayers out here, Jorge.
Okay.
And they want to make sure they're getting their investment back, so go with it.
Well, I'm going to go with that because when I apply, and I had to write it down because I would forget net present value, but with a 7% discount rate and taking a bunch of differences of values and benefits and costs, what it translates to is $2 of benefit for every $1 invested. That's huge. I mean, I don't know too many large transformational programs that are promoting those kinds of dollars.
I want to stop you right here to ask a question that the audience was asking me before we began tonight. The research that you do, is it based largely on problems that have happened where the government or the private sector has come to NextGen and said, this keeps happening, can you find a solution?
There's a little bit of that. We'll talk a little bit more when we talk about the Florida test bed itself, but the short answer is there is a planning document called the NextGen Segment Improvement Plan. And in it they have operational improvements. And some of our illustrious students and young professionals here have laid out roadmaps that we're presenting to the FAA that say, based on your operational improvement needs, we are going to be doing the following rapid prototyping and demonstrations and concept development activities. So it's based on known operational improvements. Now, we're going to evolve that a little bit further when I get into the Florida test bed discussion, because there's a combination of operational needs and technology pull. Because as the plan was developed a few years back, technology is advanced. So we have the opportunities, and my colleagues will tell you that, to actually start doing some technology pull. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, it did.
Okay.
I want to bring these other gentlemen in because they come from a different aspect. They're on staff. This is faculty here at Embry-Riddle, and we have air traffic controllers. And one of the things I found fascinating, because when Clyde first mentioned to me several months ago about the prospect of including this subject in the series, he reminded me of how long you have been an air traffic controller, and then you came to education. Give a little background, all three of you, if you would. Give us a little bit about your background in air traffic control management for the benefit of our radio audience.
Well, my background is I was hired with the FAA and worked in the terminal option. I worked in towers and TRACONs. That's primarily where I spent about 25 years with the FAA. So operationally, probably TRACON is the experience which I was involved in the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years working for the FAA. I came here to Embry-Riddle about 6 years ago, and I teach air traffic control courses to our students who want to be air traffic controllers. But also, I'm interested in these next-gen concepts, because it actually makes the air traffic controller's job a little bit easier. It makes our job in the flying public easier, because we're working in a system which just is going to move easier. It's going to be easier for us as passengers to be part of that system. It harmonizes what's going on in the different countries around the world. And there's international standards that are taking place, and certification standards, safety, efficiency, and whatnot. This is all part of that next-gen process worldwide.
And by the way, just to interrupt for a second, for our audience that may not know this, it's not one world system for air travel. As you educated me last week, you all, there are individual policies set up by countries in Europe.
That's
so
right.
we have one for us, and then they have all different?
They do. We call it NextGen. NextGen is strictly a United States program. There's also CSAR, which is in Europe. There's a program called Sirius, which is in Brazil, in Carrots, which is in Japan. The rest of the world would use something through the ICAO format, which is International Civil Aviation Organization, which would be the ASBUs, Aviation System Block Upgrades. And all these systems come together to harmonize worldwide air travel. And so what I like so much about our particular courses that we have here at Embry-Riddle is myself and Professor Lauth, we organized a study abroad class where we were taking our students out to Europe to examine the differences between the United States and Europe and trying to compare and contrast these different systems. So, and then we're involved in other areas of research in the university, which helps Jorge and his group over in the NextGen testbed. So there's, you know, there's so much energy here on campus that it's just a thrill for me to be part of it with the students that are here.
Greg, a little bit about your background as well, sir.
My background is 35 years with the FAA. I'm probably the senior statesman on the panel. Thank you. I had to bring my walker in with me. I spent 25 years in the en route environment. Those of you who don't speak air traffic, there are actually 3 domains of air traffic: the tower, the TRACON, the terminal radar approach control, and the en route domain. And so 25 years of my 35 years I spent in a large East Coast air route traffic control center. 17 and a half of those years I was a controller, and then the other 8 years in the field I was in various levels of field management. My last 10 years I spent at FAA headquarters and 800 Independence Avenue in Washington, D.C., managing national programs. I was the assistant division manager for air traffic training. I did some litigation work. I'm also an attorney. I also did some accident investigation. I was the branch manager for accident investigation in the FAA when TWA 800 went down, and also the Value Jet went down in Miami. And then my final position was division manager of technical operations training. Retired in 2005, and I've been here for 8.5 years at Embry-Riddle teaching.
Marty, your story.
I'm also a retired air traffic controller. I did that for 27 years, and what's interesting is most of my experience is in the tower. So between the 3 of us, we have each of the basic air traffic control options covered, with between the approach control, the en route centers, and the towers. Workplaces in like Chicago and Miami and so forth. My claim to fame, I guess, is that I have a whole family of air traffic controllers. There's 8 of us that are controllers in my family. So we get around the Christmas table and talk air traffic controlling. And that
Come on!
Yeah, my wife gets pretty tired of it.
Yeah, it's a party.
Well, he has one in-law that's a pilot.
Yeah, we have aviation.
Is there I always wondered if there's friction in this industry like there is in other industries. You know, the pilots blame the controllers blame the pilots.
Oh, we always blame the pilots. But and they do the same.
I want to ask before I come back to Jorge on what's going on at the test bed now. Are there situations that come up in the classroom in which students and or situations that have been in the news provoke discussion, and suddenly you realize there's a problem, and then you come back to the test bed folks, the research people, and say, can you work on this? Does that happen where you come to them and say, can you work on this and help us? How does the interaction, because you're faculty here, all employees of Embry-Riddle, but faculty, and it's separate from the test bed. To explain to our audience how it works. Who leads? Does research lead to education? Does education come back and ask research to work out things? How does it work?
We're sort of 2 sides of the same coin, I would say. We don't bring the test bed issues because they're funded in other places besides the university. Harris Corporation, a number of the other corporations help to fund the test bed. And so sometimes we'll bubble up some ideas, perhaps to bring to their industry partners to see if there's any interest out there, or to bring to their customer, the FAA, to see if there's any interest in doing any research in that area. But we don't task, and I think that's where you're going. We don't task the test bed to do any research, no.
Jorge, this is not the only test facility of its kind. Would you explain for our radio audience and those gathered here who may not know this, there are several places around the country. There are other places in the state, or am I mistaken?
There are other places around the country, but we have a little bit of a unique slant to it, and Sid mentioned it a little bit in terms of the industry partners. So I'll touch on that just a second. What I did want to do, though, was close a little bit on the financials, since that seems to have a big interest, especially when you throw out a 2-to-1 ratio on the financials. So I mentioned about $106 billion worth of cost savings. And the thing that impressed me the most is that 77 billion of that 106 billion is on savings that are estimated from flight delays. So think about it, that thing which aggravates us the most, right? Flight delays. Whether you're at the terminal, or whether you're at the tarmac, or whether you're in flight and you're circling around a circle, those delays are the things that the FAA and NextGen are aimed at doing the most value for. And so 77 out of that 106 billion is a big deal. So next time you walk up to a young lady or a young man who's behind the counter trying to rebook your ticket, at least understand, say, hey, at least we know we're doing something in NextGen with it, right? That might help a little bit. The other $29 billion comes through safety improvements, cost savings, CO2 emissions, and more direct routes, those kinds of things to avoid flight cancellations. So those two numbers constitute the $106 billion. You wanted me to talk a little bit about the research facilities. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to my colleague who knows a little bit more about the various facilities. And
Wade Lester is with us, I believe.
he's well, I like to refer to him as the often emulated, never equaled Wade Lester. He's a program manager
Okay, we've got a microphone for you right here, Wade,
at the test bed.
and maybe you can explain
so
what's going on.
I think it's on, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the question was, can you tell us
A little bit
more?
about what's going on right now at the test bed.
Well,
meaning, well, I think you mentioned specifically about other
other
test
facilities.
bed
Yeah,
locations.
well, yeah, there are other locations around the country. How does this one differ from the others?
Well, there are 3 different facilities that the FAA has identified as NextGen related test facilities. There's a NASA facility in Texas, and then really from an FAA perspective, the William J. Hughes Technical Center is really their premier site for testing all the systems that go out into the National Airspace System. There's a component within the William J. Hughes Technical Center that's called the NIAC. The first letter is NextGen, and the last letter is capability. I can't remember what's in the middle there, the acronym. But so the NIAC also has some capabilities, and it's very centric on leveraging the capabilities at the Tech Center. What makes us different here at the Florida NextGen test bed is the model that we used, that we created since the whole thing evolved right here at Embry-Riddle. And that is, we sat down with some industry partners and said, the FAA has talked about NextGen. They've got all these planning documents. Everything is laid out very nicely in a plan, but nobody's really doing NextGen. So we said, why don't we do NextGen? So with our industry partners, we brought some capabilities to the test bed and really started to demonstrate some of the NextGen concepts that the FAA had described.
Okay.
From there, our model has continued. That is the relationship with industry, government, and academia moving NextGen forward. So it's not a government entity, it's truly a collaboration between those 3 entities.
Okay, and for our audience that may be hearing some of this for the first time, there is no real beginning and end to NextGen. It's a process, hence
Right.
the title, correct?
It's
an
well,
evolution.
Think of it as national airspace modernization. When do you want to stop modernizing your national airspace?
Okay.
The answer is never.
Okay, I want to
So
give
it is
give some
evolution.
meat to this audience right away, and because a big reason for inviting you all to come was to showcase things that have come from NextGen that benefit our lives on an everyday basis that you may or may not know came from the work done by NextGen. And this is open to anyone, including you, sir. That let's throw out some things that are everyday, perhaps that came through NextGen technology, development, research, that are making our air travel better. Anybody want to throw anything out?
ERAM is one of the big things, the en route modernization program, and that's at all the air traffic control centers. And here again, they probably could talk more specifically on those, but from a controller perspective, the equipment that they're using has been updated significantly. The capabilities of that equipment have been updated. And as of to date, I think almost every air traffic control center, of which there's 20 in this country, have been updated with this new equipment. There's really only a couple left that have to be, and they probably by the end of this year will be completed. So that whole process that the en route air traffic control centers, the equipment and stuff that they use has all been modernized and updated. And like I said, the capabilities are far more extensive for the controllers, being able to handle more airplanes, being able to handle more safely and so forth. And like I said, they could probably explain more detail because they work with it every day at the test bed, I'm sure.
Wait.
Well, a couple of things. ERAM definitely is one of those key systems, and it is in essence, the heart of the air traffic control environment. So it has been modernized, and it's continuously being upgraded. But you put that together with some other systems, and not everything is done at the Florida NextGen test bed. I mean, NASA, for example, has developed some technologies that eventually made it out to the field that helps air traffic controllers manage aircraft in a sequence. So there's actually a queuing theory, if you will, where aircraft are coming in way early. They can tell them, if you hit these points at specific times, then there will be a slot available for you when you land at the airport, rather than circling around and waiting for your slot to come available. So they're doing much better with that. You put all that together with some other enabling technologies such as SWIM, and SWIM is that architecture that says we can share information between all these systems, and those who need that information will have access to it. So it's kind of an internet, if you will, a means for sharing information between all these systems. That's one of those enabling technologies as well. You put all that together, that's the technology piece. But when it comes to us, it allows us, again, better on-time travel, a smoother flight if we're trying to reduce that weather impact, and then lastly, and we still experience it. You get to the airport, we'll be 5 minutes early, but we're going to have to sit here and wait for a gate to open up. That information sharing then will allow the airlines as well much more breadth of information that comes from the air traffic control environment to tell the airlines, plan for your gate, the aircraft's going to be 5 minutes early, this, that, and the other, and those are the types of things that will really bring us the benefits.
Fine.
Yeah, I might point out that the NextGen concept has been going on for years. It's not something that just started today, and it's not going to end tomorrow. And so we're starting to see some real benefits of it, but probably performance-based navigation is number one. Airspace redesign so that we can have performance-based navigation, where we're using satellites for navigation instead of the ground systems. That alone has created savings, which I just pulled this off of Atlanta's Metroplex, $8.3 million in fuel savings for the airlines, which ends up going to, when we're flying, and carbon emissions into the atmosphere are also examined. Now, what's that mean to us as an individual flying in the system? It might only mean minutes. They might shave 5 minutes off of a flight, but there's so many flights that 5 minutes times, 2,000 flights at Atlanta really amounts to quite a bit of money in savings. So for us as a passenger, it might just be strictly getting to the gate without a delay, as Wade was talking about, and having a gate available. It's quite a system when you start thinking about it.
I want to make a leap to general aviation. We put an alt call out to the general aviation community. The Spruce Creek Fly-In is here. There are several small airports, some of which are commercial. Does this affect general aviation, NextGen study and technology, or is it largely commercial?
I'd like to respond.
Please,
I'd like to
Greg.
dovetail on something that Clyde said, and that is that NextGen is the current iteration of an evolution that began on December 17th, 1903. When Orville and Wilbur took off at Kitty Hawk, we began to improve our air transportation system every day, every week, every month, every year. And so NextGen is just the current iteration as the senior member, I guess, of the panel. Having spent 35 years with the FAA, I've seen NAS Stage A, I've seen Advanced Automation Modernization, and I've seen all kinds of programs very much like NextGen. The bottom line to those programs, the consistent bottom line to those programs is increased efficiency and increased safety. And so when you look at something that was introduced in around 2005, 2006 era, it was reduced vertical separation minima. And so before 2005, we needed 2,000 feet of separation between flight level 290 and flight level 410. Many of you fly jets, general aviation jets, business jets, and you fly at those altitudes. If you don't have the reduced vertical separation minima equipment on board, you would not be allowed to fly in those altitudes which are more efficient for your aircraft. We've doubled the capacity between those two altitudes, from flight level 290 to flight level 410, without any decrease in the safety margin. And I think that's huge. We've increased efficiency, and it is as safe or safer than the system before. And so many of you who fly in those altitudes, I know some of you are private pilots at the lower altitudes, but many of you do fly those jets up at those other altitudes.
And that has expanded worldwide as
Correct.
a result of that,
Correct.
too.
Just to remind the audience, this is not my area of expertise, so forgive the elementary question. Something called a transponder is as a result of NextGen. This is an issue that involves cost. Have the airlines adopted all the new advancements made in technology from NextGen, or are they holding off until they figure out which of the systems out there might go into airplanes? Can anyone speak to that? Because I have had that thrown to me by the general public.
Well, some airlines have. Southwest has equipped a lot of theirs, and the FAA has worked with some of the other airlines to help. But I think as a whole, at least as of probably last year, a lot of the airlines were holding off, kind of waiting to see. For those that probably may work for an airline, I mean, most airlines today, they want to definitely see some kind of cost benefit before they start pouring millions of dollars of equipment into an airplane. I mean, years ago, they used to be able to go 2 to 3 years before maybe they see recouping, but this day and age, they're looking on a return on investment within 6 months. And some of the procedures and technologies aren't quite there yet to provide that, so I think some are holding off. And the FAA is willing to kind of let them stall a little bit. Over in Europe and other places, they're kind of mandating that they do that. But like I said, it's a mixed bag. Some airlines are doing it, some are waiting.
Jorge.
Definitely mixed bag, right? I mean, he just pointed it out. And the reason is every time you make a change to these aircrafts, you've got to go recertify them. You may not have the personnel to go recertify, et cetera, et cetera. That's why what we do here is so critical, because what we do here is rapid prototyping. We got our messages loud and clear from our customer community. We're all about implementation. They want to implement, implement, implement. So what's key with what we do here is rapid prototyping, providing demonstrations, showing that this concept is in fact feasible. We can turn that around to our other customer set at the William J. Hughes Technical Center, who then goes about the business of operationalizing and doing operational evaluations of those prototypes, those concepts, those demonstrations that we've done here. So that's why what we do here is so important. That's why I think we're going to begin to accelerate as we move into more of a let's go implement these things in a shorter duration.
Clyde, we had a question from the radio audience, an email question to us that was, as an air traffic controller, and there's a rash of hirings that were done when Reagan fired them, and then these people are now retiring, but with NextGen as part of the process of improving, is there a concern that they'll do away with air traffic controllers or limit their presence in the tower? This was from a listener.
Yeah, I don't see that myself. You're always going to have a need for an air traffic controller. What it is the tools that are available on NextGen are just that. They're tools to do your job. For instance, ASDX in the tower. It's a surface radar that the controllers can use to safely look at something, to move an aircraft around the airport in a safe and efficient manner. So ASDX being a NextGen tool, it's not going to eliminate that job as an air traffic controller, no. Instead, it's going to enhance the job they do. It's just one of the many tools in the toolbox of an air traffic controller.
A radio caller this afternoon wanted to know, he couldn't attend tonight, he said, could NextGen Technology prevent what happened in Missouri in the last couple of days from happening, where someone lands at the wrong airport? Anybody want to take that one on?
You're the lawyer.
Yeah, I was just gonna,
how can I phrase this delicately? We're never, well, I never say never. It's well beyond my life expectancy when we take the human element out of either the cockpit or out of the air traffic control tower center or TRACON. As long as we have human beings in the loop, human beings are going to make mistakes. Controllers make mistakes, pilots make mistakes, mechanics make mistakes, you make mistakes, and so do I. And so that's the bottom line to me. And to talk about, I get this question, by the way, all the time from students and from parents of incoming students. Why should my son or daughter become an air traffic controller? NextGen is going to eliminate that job, isn't it? And so one of my responses is, it's probably also going to eliminate the pilot's job. Would you step on an airplane, look in the front of the airplane on the flight deck, and see nobody there, and stay on that airplane? I suspect that ultimately the evolution of the air traffic controller will evolve from controller to monitor, much like nuclear power plant people don't shovel coal anymore, they monitor systems. So many of the students that are coming in now will start doing the job very much the way I finished doing mine as a controller. But as their career evolves with all the new technology and with all the new computer programs, they're going to become more monitors than controllers, I suspect.
I want to get additional viewpoint from Clyde and then Jorge to close out that topic. Do you want to add to that?
Well, I think we're on the same page here. We don't see the job eliminating, but there's definitely improvement in the job. So, I don't know. I think I'd probably leave it at that.
Okay.
But,
Jorge.
I mean,
Two things come to mind. Prior to joining Embry-Riddle, we did something similar in this type of rapid prototyping domain for VA and DoD healthcare systems. And what resulted from that was the ability of physicians to have collaborative decision-making using the tools that were being provided to them. It never, ever took the physician out of the loop. It never, ever took any of the decision-making out from the patient care that the physician was engaged with. And that's the same case here. You're providing additional tools, you're providing additional decision points that will enable you to make better decisions, to make more efficient decisions. The second thing I'd like to point out is there's a recent article, this is fresh information, just yesterday came out that the FAA budgets were, did you want to talk about that?
No, I saw that. I'm glad you brought
Okay.
that up, that this is a good thing. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
it's a very good thing. And so it looks like the FAA budgets, and in particular for NextGen, are going to be holding relatively stable, and that the hiring freeze is being lifted rather. And so one of the complaints that we were getting from our customer set was that 48% of their staff was at or near retirement age, and that and another customer set was telling us that 41% of their staff was at or near retirement age. So the opportunity for our Embry-Riddle young professionals is actually improving, and with yesterday's announcement, I think it improves even more. When we get into the discussion on the Florida test bed a little bit more, I'll talk a little bit more about young professional opportunities.
Why don't you go with that right now?
Okay, so so one of the things that Wade started to talk about is who we are in the Florida test bed, and what we are really is we are a partnership with industry, government, and academia, where Wade and a bunch of my colleagues actually brought together these best-in-class folks to start developing these next-gen initiatives. Although the Florida test bed is a government-funded facility, it is in fact a very robust platform where we actually end up doing a lot of the prototyping, a lot of the demonstrations, as I mentioned earlier, and that's initiated here. We're privileged to manage that facility. We do so under the direction of the William J. Hughes Technical Center. We are in fact unique in that we have established a microcosm of the national airspace and to demonstrate those concepts and procedures. And as a matter of fact, the international community, going back to some of the comments that were made earlier, have viewed us very favorably. And so some of that hard-won trust and respect has translated into us receiving inquiries from the international community on how to go about replicating what they've done. And so that goes to the international harmonization issues that Clyde mentioned earlier. But back to our young professionals, we've had the privilege of working with our diversity and inclusion folks, Dr. Robin Roberts and her folks, to help bring along many of those young professionals into the Florida test bed. Next month, is it? We're hosting the Strategic Supplier Alliance. It's next month that we'll be hosting the Strategic Supplier Alliance, and we will be bringing in our industry partners who not only benefit by the tasking that we're providing through the test bed itself, but there are opportunities for networking for our young professionals. So we are going to set up networking opportunities for them to be able to meet industry professionals, senior level executives, and be able to actually start some networking opportunities. And by the way, while we're talking about our corporate industry partners, I'd like to give a shout out to our industry partners, specifically Harris, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Mosaic, just to name a few. There are many, many more. But without them, without their investment, without their energy, without their efforts, we would be nowhere. So I want to give them a shout out because they've done a tremendous job, not only of advancing the FAA operational improvements, of advancing NextGen itself, but offering opportunities to some of our students and young professionals.
We're going to come to the audience for questions, and also, how many are here from any of the clubs tonight? Anyone here from any of the clubs, aviation or otherwise? Okay. Weather. We have this a consideration from a listener. We did something on climate change about a year and a half ago, I believe. And the question to the panel is, changes in weather patterns. How is NextGen dealing with that? How do you as air traffic controllers deal with sudden weather changes like year to year? Does it affect the way you conduct your jobs first? How does NextGen deal with weather changes?
From a NextGen perspective, the advances in weather radar and the advances in the modeling of weather systems has helped out the ATC system significantly. But weather is Mother Nature, and Mother Nature has a mind of her own. And when Mother Nature likes to play tricks, the system suffers, and the system then reacts. One of the touchstones for me, at least, when I see a line of thunderstorms, and the center I worked in between May and September, about 11 o'clock in the morning, you'd see them start to pop up on the radar. Then about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they start to form into clusters. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they would be a line from Buffalo to Miami. And my touchstone was, would I put my loved ones on an airplane and go through that weather system? And so when we hear complaints about staying on the ground, hear complaints about ground delays, or hear complaints about weather delays, the fact is that when Mother Nature decides to throw a thunderstorm at us, there's not much that we can do about it. Those of you who are pilots, don't fly through thunderstorms. I know you don't, because in that line from Buffalo to Miami, there are about 5 or 6 holes, and you all aim for it at the same time. And then that's why I don't have any hair anymore, because of all the years I spent trying to keep you apart while you're all aiming for the same point in the sky. But the Mother Nature is going to do what Mother Nature is going to do.
I wanted to ask Clyde and Marty to both say, if you were just starting your careers again, based on what you know now, would you have chosen to be an air traffic controller? With all the tools that are available, is it more challenging? Is it more difficult to ascend to become an air traffic control person from when you started in your career for both of you?
Well, there's no doubt in my mind that I would do the air traffic control route again. The tools that are there, like I said, they help you do your job better. I'm thinking about the weather systems. TDWR, Terminal Doppler Weather Radar. That type of system allows us to look a little closer at those weather systems as they're moving across the airport. A NextGen component didn't, one of the other things might be, say, some surface management tools or whatnot. Collaborative systems that we have in place, collaborative traffic management tools. Wade mentioned TMA, Traffic Management Advisory, being able to slow planes down and get them into the system. It really makes your job a little bit easier when everything works right and this new technology is moving that direction. So I guess the short answer is I would absolutely go into this career. It was a great career, and it's exciting. I mean, it really is. As Sid was talking about, would you put your family on that plane? Yeah, you look at those kinds of things, but really the fact of the matter is it's a great job.
So people can fly with more confidence now, that they're getting the best information available. Marty, your thoughts on the same question?
Absolutely. I would have tried to pursue a career in air traffic controlling, and obviously 2 out of my 3 kids did, so they must have thought it was a pretty reasonable, decent, career. It was exciting, and like my 2 colleagues said, the technology over the last 35 years since I was first starting into it, has expanded to allow us to, handle more aircraft at a given time. Back 30, 40, 50 years ago, I mean, we didn't have the numbers of aircraft that we had today, and thankfully so, because, we were using not as obviously up-to-date equipment and things as we have now, and all the tools that we just mentioned about flow. I mean, right after the air traffic controller strike, basically, half the planes ended up sitting on the ground, and you had to call on the phone to see if you could, get a release to go airborne, and it was very structured, and out of that, became all these tools that we use to flow traffic and so forth. Before the strike, they used to, and I'm sure Sid could talk on this even more extensively than I, hold aircraft. They wouldn't think about holding aircraft in holding patterns all over the place. There was no such thing as like, well, let's just keep these airplanes on the ground for now until we know that there's a clean slot for them to get into an airport. And they do that much better today with the technologies. Technology.
You just hit on a point that a listener wanted us to talk about, the circling in the air. You're saying that there's less of this now because we have the technology to look for that clean path, so we may keep them on the ground longer?
Right. They have, and here again, like I said, I'm not saying they don't hold, because I've been on some flights recently where we have gone into holding, but usually it's only for maybe a couple of minutes. Whereas it was probably not uncommon for places like Chicago and Washington and New York to have 50, 60, 80, 100 airplanes in holding at one time waiting to get into an airport. But that was before we had a lot of weather forecasting tools and things like that. Now with the forecasting that we have and the tools for traffic management that we have, we know an airplane departing LA, he needs to sit on the ground for 30 minutes so he can have a good shot to get into New York without having to hold and so forth.
Okay. This question is a conjecture question. I'm telegraphing this to you right now. Given the mood in Washington and the way that this is an election year and Congress people got voters pounding on them who then pound on agencies like the FAA, are we under pressure, and I say it as an aviation community, to get NextGen right and get it to a certain point by a certain deadline to please the money watchers in Washington? Is that true?
Absolutely.
Anybody?
Absolutely. And so the new deputy administrator, retired General 2-star Bolton, that's the push. Implementation, implementation, implementation. So making sure that he's got that 2-to-1 return on investment coming to him a lot sooner makes a whole lot of sense. What we're focused in on is, number one, making sure we're delivering that implementation appropriately, and number two, to the question on what the optics are in Washington on it, it's about messaging, right?
Okay.
It's about being able to tell them that we are improving situational awareness. You asked the weather question. You asked the delays in the sky question. It's about situational awareness. If you've got the ability to predict that you're going to be in a queue or where you're going to be at due to weather, you can make changes in your speed, you can make changes on where you're going to be at in traffic flow, et cetera. But the message isn't just, I'm going to save this flight time. I'm going to also be able to save things down the economic work stream, if you will. If I know that I've got flights from New York to Heathrow or Gatwick over the pond, and I know that I'm going to be delayed by 4 or 5 X number of hours, or I'm going to have a cancellation, the economic work stream down from there, rental car companies, hotels, and so forth, that have inventory that they're holding on to, there's a savings there, right? There's a direct savings there. And that's the kind of messaging we want to promote. Is it's not just the economic savings to the FAA, it's not just the economic savings to the airlines and the airports and us and saving time, but there's a whole downstream effect that we need to be able to message appropriately. So the short answer is yes, it's about implementation, but it's about adequately messaging that implementation.
We're going to come to the audience for your questions, and if you have a question that you'd like to ask anyone on the panel, my colleague Clinton Oren with the microphone will come to you. If you raise your hand, he'll get to the first person. Before we go to the question, though, and this will be the first question we take, next month, February 5th, we're doing a program on unmanned systems. That's a whole other kettle of fish. We're going to talk about drones and robotics, and these are unmanned systems in general, and there'll be an ethical component to the discussion. For the purposes of our panel here, do unmanned systems enter into any of your work now? I know that recently in the news, Florida was not given the green light. So address to the audience, if you will, and anyone can throw in a comment, how unmanned systems are going to play into this whole next-gen thing.
So we've done some work at the Florida test bed on unmanned systems, and what I'd like to do is go back to my colleague Wade Lester, who is the program manager for that. Wade, can you talk a little bit about what we did with the unmanned systems? I think you folks will find it interesting.
So I think as many of you know, then Congress has mandated that the FAA accommodate unmanned systems in the national airspace system, and that's not an easy feat. So Jorge and company were actually talking about the interstate highway system. Now you're actually including something that's unmanned, and I think it was Clyde who mentioned, I'm sorry, maybe it was Sid, but walking onto an aircraft and you don't see anybody there. There was no pilot. Would you actually get on that plane and fly? So from a UAS perspective, the Congress mandated the FAA accommodate unmanned aircraft in the national airspace system just like any other aircraft, meaning file and fly. And so it's a big undertaking as well, and the FAA is due to accommodate that. There were a couple of things that we have done through the NextGen program. And there was a series of 6 trials that the FAA had started early on, even before the congressional direction. And we focused on 2 areas. One was the idea of the communication itself. Normally when a pilot flies from sector to sector, they change their radio frequency, and now they're talking to new controllers as they traverse the airspace. Well, the pilot is sitting down in a ground control station, flying an unmanned aircraft, but still traversing the same airspace. So we worked on a voice communication system with Harris Corporation. We had Customs and Border Protection, the Air Force. We were working with FAA, of course, and some of our other industry partners. And the idea then was, could we use our voice over IP technology, that which the Skype and those kinds of things, to do the same thing? Pilot sits on the ground, still actually has a dial. It looks very traditional, still changes the dial and changes the frequencies, but he or she is actually sitting in the one location and then still talking to the controllers as they move. That was one of the trials, and so we built a prototype and we moved that forward, and there were additional trials that moved forward with the FAA. And then the second piece was a situational display that allowed the pilot to see what we call the own ship display, meaning they could see right in the middle of the display their aircraft and then everything else around it. So there's a lot of issues to deal with when the pilot's sitting here and they're not looking out, out their windshield and looking at their radar like they would. And each one of those is a component. There's many components. One being if you lost link, meaning the actual communication to direct the unmanned aircraft. What happens if you lose it? Well, each one of those is an issue that has to be dealt with. We focused on just those 2, the radio communication and then the situational display for the pilot. And those moved on. So right now, then, that's what we've got in our portfolio.
Wade, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go to the audience, and we ask if you can keep your question short so that we can get as many voices involved. Thank you, sir, for being with us tonight. Your question for our panel.
First, thank you, Mark, for the good work that you do with this speaker series.
Thank you,
I
sir.
have yet to come to one where I didn't learn something new, and I've enjoyed them all. I'd like to address a subject that is of great interest to general aviation pilots, and not so much from an economic viewpoint, but from a safety viewpoint. And that is ADSB and system like ADSB, both in and out. Where does that fit in the NextGen program?
This is open to anybody who can field the question.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say ADSB obviously is a major part of the NextGen, and it's certainly well on its way. I mean, I believe almost all the stations, and for those that may not be familiar with ADSB, it's a set of stations around the country that will help alleviate or at least support the radar system that we have. And with some of the technology with ADSB, the pilot will be able to, well, first of all, the controller will be able to get information about that aircraft through the GPS signal and so forth. And then in return, the pilot in the future will be able to get information about the traffic that's around him. So the pilot will be able to see almost exactly what the controller will see as far as the traffic. So that to me is one of the true benefits, and of course in addition to weather and other things. But the situational awareness by the pilot community, especially general aviation, that airliners have had it for years with TCAS and things like that. They've had kind of onboard radar systems where they can pick up other aircraft, but for the general aviation, that really hasn't been there. Well, now with ADSB, they'll be able to fly into an airport and they'll be able to see everybody else in the pattern, and they'll be able to see the people that they're following or those that are going to be following them and so forth. So to me, that just brings the pilot more into the loop, and so they could help each other. And trust me, as a controller, I've had to rely on pilots to do things to help me work the airplanes out, and so this to me only helps improve that. Now it's going to take a few years because obviously it can be kind of expensive in some respects, but hopefully as time goes by it'll become cheaper.
Thank you. Let's go back to the audience. Your question now for our panel.
Again, thank you for putting this together. My question is, how would NextGen affect the business aviation community going from one general aviation airport to another, bypassing a commercial airport? Just your take on that.
Want to talk about RP?
Sure, go ahead. Well, probably the one benefit I could just think of right off the top of my head would be required navigation performance, which is allowing pilots to fly a little more accurately using, it's a performance-based navigation procedure. And RNP comes in many forms, but RNP allows for approaches to be made to an airport that can be very distinct and set up to miss terrain. It reduces, again, the emissions. The time to get to the airport could be reduced. So anytime you're reducing that type of flight time, you're going to save money. The business community is going to save money. I think, too, you could take noise, which a lot of people don't think about. We try to be pretty good neighbors in response to moving noise around. You can actually have the approaches be in an area that's not quite so noise sensitive and put that noise in areas, the aircraft, very accurately put them over areas which is a little bit better for the noise than maybe over a noise sensitive area. So, that might be a couple of the benefits there.
And just one to tail on to what Clyde was saying is that going back to the RNP approaches, now you've got a lot of airports that they don't have necessarily ILS instrument landing systems and so forth. Well, they're, the FAA and so is developing these approaches to a lot more airports, a lot more where they could get in at lower altitudes with more weather around. So, I mean, to me, that was a good benefit for the business pilot, general aviation pilot, to be able to go into a lot of airports that they may not have been able to fly in before with weather around. So.
Listener question, does anyone on the panel know what are the oldest commercial aircrafts still in the air? There was a retirement, wasn't there, in the last day or so?
DC-9.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So what's the oldest now?
Well, there's DC-3 still flying around.
Really?
Yes.
Now, see, they're laughing. These people are out here thinking, I don't want to be on an old plane. What's the real deal on this? If they're fully functional and they're kept up, can they fly forever?
I wouldn't say forever, but they can fly for a long, long time.
What's the lifespan, realistically? Is it 30, 40 years?
30, 40 years.
Do they become weakened, the fuselage
Well,
becomes...
take a look at the C-130 and the B-52.
Yeah,
that's 1950s design that's being flown in 2013 and 2014. C-130, those of you who are in the Navy, the A-6, also the same era. The Navy's still flying the A-6. Those designs, the P-3, how about the P-3? It's the old Lockheed Electra. Those of you who used to fly the Eastern Shuttle between Boston and New York and Washington, they used to fly on Lockheed Electras. That's just a P-3. The Navy's still flying P-3s. So those airframes and those designs can last for a long time.
So nobody should be worried.
I would not be worried.
The audience, once again now, for our panel tonight. Thank you for being with us.
Hi. I was curious, how large is the NextGen community? And with the general increase in aviation and with all the technologies you've put out, do you expect NextGen to continue growing and put out even more things, or kind of stay where it is?
How large is the community?
Large in terms of what? So we talked a little bit about it being an international program, so we're working with the Europeans as well. It is a nationwide program, so that interstate highway goes nationwide, certainly.
But do they interweave with this program? Those other nations, or are they separate?
No, they do. As a matter of fact, there's a big push to do that kind of international harmonization. And I keep going back to my colleague Wade. Wade's leading a very specific task called Mini Global, which is actually looking to reach out to much more than just the European community, but Brazil and India and Pacific Asia. So when you ask how large, it's kind of a difficult question to answer. It certainly is a worldwide initiative, but it's domestically based. We're leading the charge domestically in terms of setting standards, setting protocols, developing proof of concepts, and actually taking a move out. And just the 30 seconds on it, one of the reasons why we're taking the lead is, number one, we're a government, the FAA is a government-owned entity, and it's a little more straightforward for us to work, whereas the European community has, 38 air navigation service providers, some of which are for-profit organizations. So just imagine trying to get 38 organizations together. So there's an international push that we're involved with as well. So large, yeah, it's really large.
Additional viewpoint, Clyde.
Yeah, let me just piggyback on what Jorge mentioned. When you look at that, how large this NextGen, CSAR, Carrots, I mentioned all those different organizations across the world, you have to harmonize these aircraft. An aircraft takes off from New York and it's immediately moving into other countries. You can't have different countries assigning different requirements, certification requirements for their pilots or for their aircraft to be flying through their country. The systems have to work. They have to be harmonized. It's huge for the business community. They're all providing input into these different airline industries. I've seen all kinds of figures on what the aviation community means to the gross domestic product.
It's about 10%.
Yeah, anywhere from 10% down to 5%, depending on what statistic you look at. And worldwide, that same 10% figure seems to hold true in terms of what aviation means to the economic development.
I want to insert something else into this. We've been talking about moving people in this thing. What about things? This morning at the discussion I was in about unmanned systems, we were talking about this story that came out that Amazon leader was saying, yeah, maybe we'll use unmanned systems to deliver. And Charles Reinhold said to me, listen, that's not going to happen. It's too expensive. You've got more of a chance of the guy from Amazon delivering them on foot than he does of having drones deliver these things. But in all seriousness, what about the element of delivery of items? I'm talking about postal systems, postal companies. Are they in this? Are they industry partners? Do they have a seat at the table? The delivery of items as opposed to people.
UPS and FedEx. Someone asked from the audience. Someone asked about ADSB and how that is going to be utilized. FedEx hubs in Memphis. They staff the air traffic control tower, TRACON, and center in Memphis on the midnight shift, like the rest of the world staffs their day shifts and evening shifts, because FedEx comes in between 11 o'clock and leaves somewhere between 4 and 7 a.m. And they're coming from all over the world. FedEx has installed ADSB in all of its aircraft. That's a next-gen item. And they assist in reducing their airspeed based upon their situational awareness through the on-flight deck ADSB display in assisting air traffic control in having a smooth arrival into Memphis. Why? Because it's in FedEx's best interest. It costs them less to reduce their own airspeed based upon their own situational awareness, based upon the ADSB on board the flight deck, than it does to go into airborne holding.
Additional viewpoints?
No, I just want to conclude on, the young man had asked a question about staying power. What's the staying power of the program itself? And I'd like to cite three very brief points. One is that the Florida test bed has had we recently won an extension for 5 years. So if that gives you an indication, you know, we're going to be around at least at the Florida test bed for 5 years, and that's a great piece of news. Just recently I mentioned the funding profile where the NextGen funding itself was essentially untouched. And then the third piece, and probably the one that's most encouraging to me, is that retired General Bolton is now the head. He's the deputy administrator, and that's a tremendous thing for us. You know, implementation. That's our sweet spot. That's where we want to go. So to answer your question, from the staying power perspective, I think we're in good shape. Did I answer your question? Thanks.
Before I move on, anybody else want to add to what has been said about the, okay, let's go back to the audience now, and your question for our panel. Good evening.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity. Back to ADSB, what percentage of the United States is covered now, and do you know at what rate they're installing new sites?
The percentage of the country that's covered now by
ADSB?
ADSB.
Yes. I mean, the last one I saw, and that was looking at it a little bit today and yesterday, was, I mean, it's like 80% of the country is covered by ADSB.
Of the contiguous states, you mean?
Right. And there's only, I don't know, and they may know at the NextGen testbed, but there's only like 50 more sites that they need to install, and they'll be complete with that, and they expect that to be done by the end of this year. So, I mean, the infrastructure is pretty much there for ADSB. It's complete. So now we're just waiting for all the users. You know, many have already got the equipment like we talked about, but there's a lot more that don't. And kind of just going back for a second, and you know, we were involved in a study a couple of years ago about, you know, best equipage, best service. In other words, would an aircraft that had the best equipment get, you know, better service? And to a point, from a controller perspective, we found that, well, it doesn't help us from a controller perspective if only 1 out of every 4 airplanes have the equipment to get to a place. Because normally, from a controller point of view, we're going to try to do the safest and most efficient way, whether the equipment, you know, aircraft is equipped or not. But as more aircraft are equipped, and you know, a higher percentage, and maybe just the exception doesn't have it, then we can really take advantage of the equipment and expedite moving aircraft and increasing the flow and efficiency and safety.
That thought of first come, first serve, like we've all known in aviation and flying around, that's been something that we've held on to, but this best equipped, best served has surfaced every once in a while. And some of the areas that surface, Sid mentioned it in the RVSM. It's not like it's anything new that, you know, you can't go in that airspace unless your aircraft is equipped a certain way. So on the ADSB, you know, our fleet here at Riddle is 100% equipped with ADSB. Our pilots flying at Embry-Riddle fly with ADSB equipped aircraft, utilizing it every day. So it's a great actual test bed for that equipment.
I'm curious because I think it may have been Clyde that mentioned about burning cleaner and the fuel component of aircraft. Is this a big issue, minimizing the lead content within fuel and moving away from that because of the pollution issue? And is that part of NextGen or NextGen's research?
Well, it's a huge issue in Europe. I mean, and it probably is becoming more so here, but in Europe, that is one of the main things that they're talking about. And I'm sure most of you have read, you know, of course, the European Union is trying to tax the airlines or, you know, fees for the CO2 that they burn. And so there's been a big, obviously, issue about that. But I would say yes, and especially in Europe. So.
And that's also part of that PBM. You know, your approaches are less, you burn less fuel, you have less CO2 emissions, less noise for the community. There's, you know, it's kind of, it all works together.
We have precious minutes left. Let's go back to the audience. And your question. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Quick question regarding unmanned aircraft and NextGen. How does it, I know now in the current air traffic system we're dependent on see and avoid of pilots seeing other aircraft and avoiding them and using visual separation. As terms of issues with integrating unmanned aircraft into the National Airspace System, I know a big part of it's sense and avoid, see and avoid. Does it seem feasible that NextGen's going to get to the point with ADSB where unmanned aircraft can be using ADSB to locate other aircraft around them to have that kind of substitute of see and avoid and enhance the detect and avoid aspect of it?
I was going to say, with technology, I wouldn't put anything past it that they'll be able to develop that within the not too distant future based on the UAS need.
The current roadmap for integration of UASs in the NAS would indicate that they have to be ADSB equipped. So I don't, you know, to me it's going to happen.
Back in the audience, your question now. Good evening.
I think I'm going to put a pin in this with the last question I think we'll have about ADSB is knowing aircraft owner myself, I know that all the equipment is rather expensive and stuff breaks, it gets very pricey. And I've heard the word expensive with installing this into general aviation aircraft. Does anyone actually have a rough dollar estimate on how much it would cost and fees and anything else that would apply, at least starting up?
All kinds of numbers have been tossed around.
Yeah.
I couldn't give you a specific figure, and I don't know a specific figure for you. I just know that I've heard everything from the silly to the sublime, right? I don't know. Sorry.
This is
It's a huge problem, but I don't have my arms around it.
and at the same time, there is no universal governing body that will make a decision saying, the United States has come up with the best technology, we're going to go with that. You've got everybody who wants to run the show. I kind of got an impression in my initial briefings by you all that if the United States, its private partners, university, research, all of that, if we didn't step up further into NextGen, somebody else would be running the show from another country. Is that true? Did I understand you guys right?
Yeah.
I believe that the United States has always been a leader in aviation around the world. Recently, my suspicion is, based upon some starts and stalls with respect to consistent funding, recently we've missed a step or two. And I think that we have not relinquished leadership in the world yet, but with all of these false starts and government shutdowns and sequestration and all of the things that are going on, we may very well see ourselves in second place at some future point.
They all want to know who's stepping up. Who's stepping up? The Russians, the Chinese,
well,
the Japanese?
I think the Europeans are stepping up. I'm doing a lot of research. The Chinese have an advantage because we have a legacy system. And we're trying to transition from a legacy system to a new system. And that's expensive to run two systems side by side. The Chinese don't have the numbers of airplanes or the infrastructure that we have currently as a legacy system. And so the Chinese have a leg up in that as their economy grows, they're able to increase their infrastructure with modern technology, where we have to rely on legacy technology.
Certainly there's some countries where they're going to go from copper to better copper, right? But in some cases they're going to go to, they're going to leapfrog. But the young man who asked the question, I don't know that I know I didn't give you a satisfactory answer, and there was another one over here that I didn't give you a satisfactory answer. But let me ask you to do this. If you have tasks, if you have questions, if you have things that we can propose to the FAA, like the question you just asked on costs for a general aviation aircraft, come see us. Send a resume or send a task suggestion over to Diana Dunham, who's sitting right here, or see me after the show, and we'll put some tasking together for you. We've been working with not just the College of Aviation, but across the university, and we'd like to reach out to our young professionals as well to say, if you've got an idea for a demonstration, if you've got an idea for a concept, or if you've got a question that nobody else has answered, we might be able to get sponsorship for that through the FAA. So, don't be shy. It really starts with this kind of a discussion. So I'm sorry to digress, but I think it was an important nugget for the young man.
Let's go back in the audience. I'm not sure where Clinton is. He's way back up at the top. Your question for our panel. Good evening.
Good evening. I got a question, and it kind of ties along with what Professor McGuirk has said about running two systems side by side. You talk about moving from a radar-based system to a satellite-based system, and is that something where you run a hybrid system for a while to see how it goes and then make the switch, or is it sort of like flipping a switch and going from one to the other?
The legacy system is still in place. We have, as a surveillance system, we currently use radar. As a communication system, we currently use ground-to-air communications on radios. As a navigation system, the VOR and Vortex system and Victor Airway structure is still in place. That's the legacy system. The future of all of those three elements of any air traffic system around the world, what the ICAO folks call CNS ATM, communications, navigation, and surveillance, the future is in NextGen. And we can't afford not to go to NextGen. Whether you like it or not, we're going to have to go to NextGen, but we can't go there immediately and just throw the switch. All of this stuff is not something that you can buy at the local hardware store. You have to hire large companies to develop the software. It's not something that you go to Best Buy and just pull off the shelf. And so it takes time for them to develop the software, and it takes time to deploy the software, and it takes time to test the software. And the FAA is not going to turn the switch on until they believe that that software is fully tested and as safe as the current system.
Let me put myself in the audience to ask this question. They're listening to you and they're thinking, the people who are not in aviation, this is great stuff. I didn't know about this stuff. But is there any room in any of this discussion for them to work on, why is it that my bags ended up in Puerto Rico instead of Pittsburgh? That's not a next-gen issue, is it?
No.
Moving
well,
that stuff.
They're getting better, though.
Swim actually will help in that
Really?
issue.
Yeah, so the system-wide
He
information management system.
Jorge
will-
talked about it just a minute there, about the taxi cabs and whatnot.
Yeah.
It will help, and as a matter of fact, back to the young man's question, iPads, right? So iPads are being used as electronic flight bags now, right in the cockpit, right? And so Wade and folks that have done some work on that in the past, and that's actually helped move forward with the iPads. Whether it will help with your lost luggage, I'm going to go back to my colleague who talked about human-in-the-loop errors, and But yes, we'll be able to track things better, and we'll have greater situational awareness.
Let me touch on one thing there too about human-in-the-loop errors. When we visited Europe, we looked at their datacom system. Okay, so we all text and we do those kinds of things. Well, we text with airplanes, and it's called datacom. Instead of communicating with our voice, we can text to them. We don't do it too often in the United States. We have some systems, PDC, pre-departure clearance maybe, and we do some other things here and there. But in Europe, we were fascinated that they're using this system of datacom in the Maastricht Upper Area Center, where when the controllers in that center could see what the pilot tuned into their flight management system, and they could see it on their radar and see exactly if they were tuning. If they told them to climb to flight level 330, they would look and see that the pilot accidentally dialed in 320, and they would tell the pilot, "Hey, you dialed in the wrong altitude," and the pilots were surprised that the controllers could see that on the ground. Safety.
Back in the audience, your question.
As we know, with our current national airspace in the United States, it's one of the most efficient systems in the world as far as handling air traffic. But with the introduction of new procedures and new technologies, do we see a possible loss in efficiency as we introduce the current career controllers to these new procedures and new technologies with the training? Do we see any possibility of that of a possible dip in efficiency in the system?
We better not.
Are you?
No.
I mean, that's the purpose.
Are you talking about efficiency in the system or efficiency by the controllers?
As they learn to implement the new systems and learn how to use them more effectively, do we see a possible like maybe lag in the controllers learning how to efficiently use these new procedures?
So would there be a drop in efficiency of controllers?
No.
No.
There's no worry about temporary dip or anything.
I mean,
Is there more to your? I mean, is there more to your question? There's a basis for it. I'm not getting it because I don't see it. Is there more to it?
Well,
Help me out.
the basis for that is say a controller who's been controlling now for 5 years. He's used to a certain set of procedures using ILS. But as we see the new approaches, new efficient approaches, do we see a possibility while they're learning these because they're running traffic right now, and they want to learn the newer procedures that NextGen is helping develop.
I can pretty much guarantee that the FAA would ensure that any controllers would be trained to be very efficient if any new technologies, and when new technologies, ERAM is a perfect example. Like I said, when they introduced ERAM, I mean the training for that was extensive before they even let the controller sit down at the position. And then that just goes back to what Sid was saying, is that the FAA always keeps these other legacy systems kind of like as a backup until the new systems are proven that they work and can maintain that safety. So there's two things there that they're very safety conscious as far as that's concerned.
Let me piggyback on that also. The United States air traffic system is by far number one in the world for efficiency. We can look at a number of metrics, and we're going to see that for safety, for cost of movement, how much we spend per IFR hour. Many of the metrics show that the United States is right at the top. That's the interesting dynamic when we start moving into these new systems, NextGen. We have to train the controllers, but they have to operate their current system. It's like changing the oil on your car when you're driving down the freeway. That system can't go down. It's not like we flip a switch and overnight some new system comes into play. So it's a system that we have to keep moving, and it has to be that efficient in doing it. But not only that, the pilots, the mechanics, and everyone else associated with that, they all have to be trained in their own domains, whatever that is. You touched on the UASs. The UASs, unmanned aerial systems coming into the airspace, everybody has to be trained on that. But in the meantime, you still have to move your traffic. It's not like we're going to shut down for a week and then, train on this and then everybody's going to start up. That's not the way it works.
Got time for one more question from the audience.
Thank you for taking the question. As a satellite-based system, satellite-dependent, could you address the issue of satellite management and then satellite backup systems? That doesn't seem to, have been addressed at this point.
Go ahead. I'm going to get to your question, but first of all, I want to talk about return on investment. There are over 1,000 ground-based navigational sites around the country right now that all have to be maintained by people who have screwdrivers in their pocket, and they have to drive out to those places. There are about 40 satellites up there, and that's part of your question. 40 satellites up there that have to be maintained, have to be replaced, but only 40, not 1,000. And so those people who are maintaining the ground-based systems are going to be phased out. They have hair that looks a lot like mine, and they're going to be phased out and go into retirement. And then the new system, the surveillance system and the navigation system, of course, will be satellite-based. There's an issue there. One of the issues is the maintenance of the satellites. Of course, we can always just send one up. The Earth is covered by 75% water. When it comes crashing down, the probability is it will crash into the ocean. We hope it does. But by the same token, we can send one up much cheaper, and it will last about 10 or 15 years in the sky, much cheaper than we can maintain 1,000 ground-based navigational sites. The issue, though, that I don't think you asked, but is really an issue in my head, is what if we have, Target just went through a hacking of their system. What if we get somebody out there, and I know you're out there, who really likes to hack into things, and they hack into our satellite communication system, and that's the issue that the FAA is struggling with right now. What is your redundancy? Right now the redundancy, of course, is the legacy system. We still have ground-based navigational aids. You can always pull out your sextant and shoot a star if you like, and navigate by celestial navigation. That could be a backup, but I don't know, many of you know how to do celestial navigation. So the question then, and it's a serious question, a very, very serious question, is how do you maintain the security once you take down the ground-based navigational aids? How do you maintain the security of the navigational system?
Wait, we barely scratched the surface, and we're out of time. So I will remind anyone who may have missed any portion of this, it'll be up on YouTube very soon through Embry-Riddle, and it'll be an audio replay at our website, marcberniershow.com, through 1150 WNDB. I want to thank Chris and Richard up in control, Clinton Oren, who helped us on the floor, Chan Wara back at our studio for producing tonight, to Diana Durham, and to Wade Lester. I appreciate both of you and what you added. I want to remind folks of our next event. It kind of follows in the whole aviation situation. It comes up on the 28th. Well, it was there a second ago. There we go. David Rimmer, former president of Excel, will tell his story of survival from a mid-air plane collision in 2006 over the Brazilian Amazon. He will be here to tell his story and answer your questions right here in the Gail Lemron Auditorium on the campus of Embry-Riddle. Begins at 7, doors open at 6, free and open to the public. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, our NextGen panel. A round of applause for them, please. Thank you so much for being here. We'll see you on the 28th. Have a very good evening.